Good afternoon, everybody. Father Ben Brown at St. Ambrose Church in Cecilia with Karen Wright to give you another reading from The Right Place, the Right Time, Memoir of a Kentucky Priest. Wearing the new style of vestment, that is alb and face mask. But I am wearing the alb today because this being the 20th of May, churches are open by direction of the governor and the archbishop. We will have Mass today at 5:30. It's 4 o'clock now, so I'll read for a while, and then we'll take a break, and we'll come back fully vested for Mass at 5:30. That will be the Mass of the Vigil of the Ascension. And then tomorrow, Mass will be celebrated for the Feast of the Ascension at 10 a.m. at St. Ignatius in White Mills, at noon, St. Clair in Colesburg, and back here again at St. Ambrose at 5:30 in the afternoon. When you come to church, of course, things will be a bit different, as we've been saying. We'll be utilizing only every other pew. So when you come in, you'll see an indicator on those pews to not sit in. At St. Ignatius, the parish council members stretch a bit of a cord across each pew, and we'll do something similar, some way of marking the pews at St. Ambrose and St. Clair. First thing, of course, about the Archbishop's message is that there's no obligation to attend Mass. Not on the Holy Day, not on Sunday. But if you choose to come, you will find that we'll be sitting in every other pew. That gives me an aisle through which to come and bring you Holy Communion. We will not be lining up for Holy Communion. We don't want people to be within 6 feet of each other at any time in the church unless they are people with whom they share a domicile, people that you live with. So if you're with people that you live with, see to it that everybody is wearing a mask, and feel welcome to sit with those people in a given pew. But if you don't live with those folks, then keep a 6-foot distance between you. If you're not wearing a mask when you come, I will invite you to take a mask from the supply that we have here. When it's time for communion, I'll have on a mask and gloves, and I'll come to that empty pew. Instead of you coming down the aisle, I'll come to that empty pew and offer you Holy Communion. And in the usual way, if you choose to receive, extend your hands. If you choose to not receive, then cross your hands. But I'll offer you Holy Communion that way. Let's see. Well, people have asked me about Eucharistic ministers and other sanctuary ministers, ushers and greeters and altar servers. We are minimalizing the number of people in the sanctuary. And as a matter of fact, I said to both Martina Spalding for St. Ignatius and also to Karen Williams for St. Ambrose to not schedule people doing sanctuary ministries, at least until we find out who's choosing to come. So I think some of our adjustments cannot be hard and fast decisions yet because we don't know what it's going to look like. My own personal guess is that we'll have in attendance approximately the size crowds that we had 10 weeks ago. On the 15th and 14th of March, we had about 40% of a typical weekend. Typical weekend, the churches that we have are about 80% full, and about 40% of that came on that first, that is last Sunday before suspension. And then, of course, suspension came into play on the 16th of March. So I'm guessing that people won't, hurry back to church, even though they will want to. I think people will return gradually. So that's some of what I expect, and as I said, we'll begin to find out just this afternoon with Mass at 5:30. I'm going to go now to the reading, and you have heard just about all that I have written so far of this memoir, Right Place, Right Time, Memoir of a Kentucky Priest. I have been writing it with the coaching of mentors on the faculty of Spalding University's School of Professional Writing, specifically in their Master of Fine Arts in Writing program. And I've been trying to write them in sequence. I'm grinning a bit because all that you have heard so far has been information that I think is pertinent to being this priest in Kentucky, but information from 1633 to about 1865. And so one of my mentors, having read probably about 75 to 90 pages of that, said, I'm tired of this stuff. I want to read something more contemporary. And she said, I'd like to read something that you write about a conflict in your life and how it was resolved. So I proposed to her that I write of a period from 1969 to 73. That was the beginning of graduate school for me. I started graduate school in the fall of 1969, and in August of 1973, I was ordained a deacon. And during that time, the conflict that I dealt with, actually there were many, but the central conflict that I'm writing about in this was the discernment of being called to the priesthood. Was I being called by my paternal father, my daddy, or was I being called by the Father in heaven? And that was something that really needed a lot of serious discernment. So anyway, you heard in the overview, in the introduction, that there were times when my father and I personified the generational conflict that seemed to be highlighted so much in the 60s, but really has always been present. But anyway, you're going to hear that played out in the section that I'm going to read now. Again, it's out of sequence, but I've given you the reason why, because my faculty member asked me to write about a conflict, and I chose that one, and she agreed. But let me say this. This is one of those situations where you know how the story ends, but knowing the end of it, hope doesn't spoil it for you. And I would also just add this before I begin. I think that if I became a priest in order to please my daddy, I would not have been as happy a man or as effective a priest as I have been. Next Monday will be the 46th anniversary of the day I became a priest. And I just don't think that I could have done it with integrity or even with personal satisfaction that I have experienced this career so far, had it not been God's intention. So anyway, you know how the story plays out, but I think you're going to still enjoy how it unfolds. In May of 1969, the world was only a matter of days from witnessing the moon landing of American astronauts and Neil Armstrong's one small step for a man and one giant leap for mankind. In Kentucky that month, there were two events which, though they did not warrant the world's attention, were nonetheless significant in my family. I graduated from college, and Thomas Floden, the son of my father's younger sister Zelma, completed his master's degree and was ordained to the priesthood. Taking an undergraduate degree in a Roman Catholic seminary did not receive much notice. In reality, the masters didn't either. However, ordination was a huge event, and we celebrated Father Tom's achievement appropriately. Tom and I had been kind of naturally paired at family gatherings for at least 8 years. When I was beginning high school in prep seminary, he was beginning college on the same campus. When I was assigned to the senior seminary in another state, he was 4 years ahead at the same location. We sometimes shared transportation. For all of those years, the family knew us as Tommy Joe and Benny Joe, the two cousins who were going to be priests. We were often photographed with Sister Marie Celine, also known as Aunt Isola Brown, another of the siblings with Fonzie, my father, and Zelma, Tom's father. Fonzie loved celebrating Father Tom's ordination and Mass of Thanksgiving, watching and sharing in all the attention being given his younger sister and her husband Fred, parents of a priest. Daddy's sister Nellie was in the limelight too, with her husband Matthew Thompson. They were Father Tom's godparents. Fonzie never missed the opportunity to point out that Nellie and Matt were also Benny's godparents. And, as he would say, we'll be doing this again in 4 years. There were moments in the earlier years, too, when our immediate family would be at an event with my dad's work associates or church event, maybe the funeral of a cousin in his or mom's generation, not well known to us kids. There would be 6 or 7 of us with them, and Daddy would say something like, "Here are my kids. This is the one who's going to be a priest." So as the graduate school years began for me, the underlying question became, if I am being called to the priesthood, by which father am I being called? God or Daddy? That spring of 1969, as in previous years, I spent a fair amount of energy lining up work for the summer months. I had had some success in earlier years with jobs such as mowing, babysitting, cleanup crew at the local swimming pool, even some unskilled factory jobs, which paid minimum wage but offered some overtime hours. Suited me fine. I didn't date. In the summer of '69, though, I would have a degree, and I thought I might go for something different. I learned of a government program at colleges and universities called Upward Bound, so I ordered their catalog and started sending letters. I didn't really think that the University of Hawaii would hire me, but why not try? As the negative replies came back, my already fragile self-esteem didn't get much of a boost, even though most of the rejections had to do with already filled positions and the common policy of giving the jobs to collegians enrolled locally. program participants were high school students who, because of their low-income situations, were losing their motivation for school. They were showing little to no interest in post-secondary school or were dropping out of high school without a diploma. Upward Bound would bring them from their farms or inner cities to a nearby campus for 7 weeks of the summers after sophomore, junior, and senior years. The academic portion of the program would be enrichment and or remedial courses as needed, with field trips, guidance counseling, and the experience of residence on campus. It was a good program for its time. Nowadays, much more is likely accomplished with advanced placement courses and the like. What I was looking for as an employee of the program was a source of income, but also a change of environment. What I needed was growth and self-confidence. From the time I was born, my family home never had fewer than 7 children. At one point, there were 9. Throughout the elementary school years, I was a very small child in large classes where there was an emphasis on sports. That competitive atmosphere only intensified at the boarding school where I attended in preparatory seminary. Academic grades were public knowledge, so there was another arena of competition. I remember being afraid to formulate, much less articulate, a personal opinion. The topics of the day were largely the changes in the church being promulgated by the Second Vatican Council. But whether it was an informal setting or the classroom, a group Bible study, or a spontaneous conversation about sports, I only expressed an opinion or made a contribution to the dialogue when I could say something which I had heard others say before me. Spending the summer at home, working in the familiar places with the same expectations, had to change. So, when I had heard from nearly all the inquiries I had mailed, I decided to initiate a call to one which had not responded. They could tell me no by phone. To my surprise, Franklin Schrader, program director at Vincennes University, who had some familiarity with my seminary college, said, quote, "I was planning to call you this week. Can you come and meet with us?" Unquote. After the interview, I was hired to be resident director of the men's dormitory and coordinator of field trips. They developed a plan for monthly weekend sessions during the school year, and I was hired for that also. The following summer, when Schrader took a position elsewhere, I retained my earlier role but became assistant program director. The benefit, though, was that I learned I could formulate and express my own opinions. I could make decisions and resolve conflicts. I could succeed at something in a setting beyond my familiar Catholic cocoon. I also made friends, female friends. One was Ms. Amy Goodhue Loomis. Think Miss Daisy. Amy Loomis was emeritus professor of music who lived in an antebellum mansion with 2 pianos and 2 German shepherds. She owned a Volkswagen but did not drive. One of the approved jobs in the school's work-study program was driver for Miss Loomis. Ted Hazel had that job. He was on staff with Upward Bound and in his spare time was doing some house painting for Miss Loomis. I helped. Then at the end of the program, Miss Loomis wanted to make her annual trip to the Shakespeare Festival at Stratford in Ontario, Canada. Ted would need help driving. As we talked about the trip, Beverly Heron, a teaching assistant and my counterpart in the women's dorm, expressed an interest. Our foursome had a 5-day trip to some of the best theater on the continent. I also met Kathy Montgomery at Vincennes that summer. She was active in the Baptist Student Union and invited me to attend and sing at Sunday services with her. I don't remember exactly how I met Anna Spears, but she was another Protestant student who lived a good bit closer to Louisville than to Vincennes. Whenever I took any of these people to my parents' home, the first thing Daddy said to them was, "Did he tell you he was going to be a priest?" I had my 21st birthday in 1969, and certainly challenging the establishment was a rather natural instinct. In that time and place, there was plenty of opportunity. I don't remember rebelling against my father on any particular issue, but we were at odds with each other in many ways. He wanted me to dress and groom myself as a priest might. His nephew, Father Tom, did. And Daddy had seen 2 of my brothers, Sam and Bob, in military uniforms. He really liked that. The Friday night of my birthday weekend, I decided to come to Louisville with some friends from the seminary to attend a performance at Actors Theater. I didn't bother to go to the house to see Mom and Daddy because I knew they would be dancing at one of their favorite places, an American Legion club. I went there, and through the open door, I could see they were having a beer at their table, waiting for the band to start playing. As I approached the entryway in my denim overalls with plaid flannel shirt and about 6 weeks of facial hair, I heard from 25 feet away the voice of the ticket seller say, "We don't want your kind in here. There's trouble everywhere you damn hippies go. Just move on." I smiled, feeling complimented that I was called a hippie, and said, "I'm studying to be a priest, and I just wanted to say hello to my parents, who by that time were coming toward the door from inside." Daddy said to the Legionnaire, "That's right, Jim, we don't want anybody looking like Fidel Castro in here. Throw his ass out." As he turned to go back to his table, Mom hugged me, but Daddy had one more shout. "If you haven't had a haircut and shave at Christmas time, don't come home." In a recent interview on National Public Radio, Michael Collins, who was pilot of the command module for that first lunar landing, said, quote, "People often say thanks for saving 1969, unquote. With the previous year, which witnessed the assassinations of Senator Robert Kennedy and Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., this time of tumult was continuing, and people my age were in the thick of it. In France, student strikes and demonstrations nearly brought the economy and the government to a halt. President Charles de Gaulle actually fled the country at one point. At home in Louisville, we were also taking to the streets. I, like many seminary students, campaigned for Robert Kennedy during the Indiana primary of 1968. Except for needing to take a summer job on the 6th of June of 1968, I would have been in the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles the night he was killed. Daddy woke me up that morning with a shout upstairs, "Wake up! Time for work! They killed your buddy Bobby Kennedy." With eyes wide open, I prayed, "Come on, God, We're trying to straighten some things out down here. We could use your help to stop this kind of shit from happening. The specific local issue in which I was involved was the open housing ordinance for the city of Louisville. Some efforts had been made to cross color lines in Louisville neighborhoods. For example, Carl and Ann Braden were a Caucasian couple who purchased a house in a white neighborhood with the intent to transfer it to Andrew Wade, an African-American veteran of the Korean War. Both families were met with violent reactions. As sit-ins became a common form of protest, I participated in a pray-in. Priests, nuns, and seminary students lined the corner of 6th and Jefferson Streets near Louisville's City Hall. I dressed in black and white, which somehow did not seem to please Daddy. That may have been the first time he spoke of me as a, quote, nigger-loving hippie, unquote. At the seminary, we loved to get mail. That spring brought hate mail. That was also the semester in which I received an A from a demanding teacher for a speech I gave in support of U.S. involvement in Vietnam. They were not original ideas, though. It was a widely spread concept known as the domino theory, that if we allowed Vietnam to fall to the communists, we would meet them in other places, like the Philippines, Hawaii, and California. But the tide would soon be turning. The Tet Offensive in Vietnam became the catalyst for still further escalation of American military involvement. But that produced still more response, with often violent protests in streets, at schools, and many other places in the city, state, and nation. I was watching television with Daddy and my brother Sam, who had already been to Vietnam, when Lyndon Johnson announced, quote, "I will not seek, nor will I accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president," unquote. I shouted, "Hallelujah!" Daddy said, "Damn hippie." As I recall, Sam's reaction was more subdued. On another evening, I was watching the CBS News when Walter Cronkite, also known as the most trusted man in America, called for the United States to withdraw our forces in the face of stalemate. President Johnson reportedly said, "If I have lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." Watching that black and white 13-inch television in the corner of the living room is one of my final memories of the house at 3713 Vermont Avenue in the west end of Louisville, where I lived the first 2 decades of my life. Another one would have been in late May of 1968. My seminary classmate, Tom Hildenbrand, who lived in another part of the city, was picking me up to go to a movie. He stopped in the middle of the street and shouted out the window, "Hurry and get in! National Guard troops are just up the block." Tom and I had been visiting seminary friends in Baltimore a few days earlier and watched from the upper floors of their building as burning and looting was happening in the neighborhoods near St. Mary's on North Paca Street. My family finally joined the White Flight and moved to the suburbs of Louisville in October of that year. My 3 best non-seminary friends, Joe Harris, Jay Hess, and Mike Evans, had been gone for several years. That same autumn was the beginning of graduate school in the seminary. Cousin Tom Floden was serving as a priest in Louisville, and I was beginning the stretch run, the 4 years during which ceremonies admitting me to several stages of the clerical rank structure would take place. The ultimate one happening on the 26th of May, 1973. It was already on Daddy's calendar. The Second Vatican Council had concluded a little less than 4 years earlier, and changes were being imagined as well as implemented. For example, many thought that celibacy for priests would become optional in the near future. My class from the seminary is currently planning a 50-year reunion. Any of the priests who attend with wives will be those who have left the priesthood. The late 1960s and 1970s saw a shocking, at the time, number of priests and religious who discontinued their vows either formally through dispensation or informally through defection. My observation at the time was that many left the ministry after one or both of their parents had died. I remember thinking, what a difficult but courageous decision that must be. The council brought many changes too in seminary education and lifestyle. There was more of an on-campus and off-campus social life. Students began to have a voice in policy making and even curricular development. Student government organizations began to take shape. I was asked to be an interim class representative for a semester until elections could be held. Then I was asked to be a candidate in the balloting. I agreed to the first part, but not the second. I did not regard this as a particularly significant position. However, internally, it made a contribution, however small, to my growth in self-confidence. One reason why I did not stand for election in the second semester was that I had successfully sought the paid position of song leader in a parish community a few miles away from the seminary. I had taught myself some guitar chords, and the liturgical changes caused churches to seek out individuals to help with congregational singing. Again, the byproduct for me was confidence building. There's also a good story from those years. The seminary, located close to the border of Spencer and Perry counties in southern Indiana, was literally surrounded by Catholic parishes, the result mostly of migrants from Germany and France, either west on the Ohio River from Pennsylvania or north on the Mississippi from Louisiana. The first parish I served was St. Ferdinand, just about 7 miles from the seminary campus. They were located literally in the shadow of a large Benedictine convent, and in time the sisters would serve parishes in the capacity of music and worship leaders. But this and the other parishes looked to the seminary first. I also served at St. Paul Parish in Tell City, south of our campus on the river. Although some interior design changes had begun, most churches, including St. Paul, had simply arranged a temporary altar facing the congregation, but left the long communion railing in place, separating the sanctuary from where the congregation remained in the pews of the nave. A microphone was set up for me inside the sanctuary, but opposite the side where the gospel was proclaimed. I faced the congregation, and accompanying myself on guitar, I would announce the hymn and take the lead on refrains, typically singing the verses solo. Catholics were just being weaned away from their experience of choirs doing all the music. My role was to teach them the new way. This change was still a far cry from widespread acceptance, and guitar replacing organ was radical. One Sunday, as the notes of the final hymn were still echoing, A man approached the communion rail where I was just putting my guitar back in its stand. He seemed to have a scowl on his face, and he said in a rural but direct tone, "I'd like to talk to you, mister." I replied, "Certainly, sir. Just give me a minute, please, to put my guitar in its case and turn off this microphone." As I did that, I thought to myself, here it comes. I'll be accused of running Jesus out of the sanctuary with my wild music. Nervously, I said, "Yes, sir, what can I do for you?" He said, "Buddy, you ever sang any country songs?" I stammered, I'm not sure whether from surprise or relief, but I said, "Do you mean like Hank Williams, Loretta Lynn?" He said, "That's right, son. We got us a bass player and a lead man, a feller what plays the mouth harp, but we need a rhythm guitar player what can sing. If you can do Hank and Loretta, we want you with us on Friday and Saturday nights down at the Legion Hall here in Perry County." After one audition, I became a regular with the group on the remaining weekends of that semester. The so-called Legion Hall was a local bar with a small stage and an area where tables could be pushed aside to make room for dancing. My other enduring memory, which helps to make for a sharp contrast between my evening gig and my morning gig, was that sitting on the floor behind every amplifier or music stand, which we didn't use, was a pint of whiskey, which we did use. The enduring lesson from that brief but colorful foray into the entertainment industry was the quality of the performance will be better if the audience drinks more than the band. Another item well worth remembering and much related to the recreational side of seminary life was a project undertaken by my class, the benefit of which is still enjoyed over 50 years later. Practically anyone today who visits the St. Meinrad Archabian Seminary campus, historic center of scholarship, learning, spirituality, will find that the place for camaraderie and social life is a pizza kitchen and watering hole called the Unstable. As students began to have a voice in school policies, one of the complaints was that even if we were given some liberty to go to theater, sports events, etc. on the weekend, there was still a need for a place to socialize for those who remained on campus. In the custom of each graduating class making a donation to the campus, my group received permission to convert the storage room of the older of two gymnasiums into a gathering place. We salvaged the lumber from a dilapidated barn and used it to line the concrete walls. These we decorated with horse collars, crosscut saws, plows, and other rustic and rusting implements. With help on such things as wiring, lighting, etc., which met required codes, we installed stoves, ovens, and a refrigeration for a full-service kitchen. We also built tables and benches. The crowning achievement and the naming of our establishment came in one fell swoop. We became the first college campus in the state of Indiana with a license to sell and serve beer. The first thought, given the decor, was the stable. Then we realized that might not always describe us. Once in a sermon in the Abbey Church, a visiting bishop made a not-so-veiled reference to the spiritual fellowship enjoyed throughout the campus. As grins and chuckles began to be heard through the congregation, quickly inserted, "Well, our blessed Lord was certainly not unfamiliar with stables. As the 1970s began, another, though much different institution was established with student initiative as I began graduate studies. I was on the founding board of the Theological Association of Mid-America, also known as TEAMA, Team A. This moniker has probably faded into the mists of time. However, our most significant accomplishment is alive and well today. This is the J term, a consortium of seminaries in Kentucky, including Lexington Theological, Disciples of Christ, Asbury at Wilmore, Methodist and Nazarene, Louisville Presbyterian, and Louisville Southern Baptist, came together with St. Meinrad to provide an opportunity for ecumenical studies and ministry formation. Students are invited to take residential courses on any of the 5 campuses during the month of January, hence J term. Such programs are fairly well taken for granted today, but this one was developed less than a decade after Vatican II. Among my memories from those early days was the embarrassment St. Meinrad experienced through a slight bit of oversight. In the course catalog for the first J term in 1971, they listed a course called The History of Women in Ministry. When registrations for this course began coming in from women to our all-male Roman Catholic seminary, our administration suddenly said, "Oops, where are we going to house them?" With the encouragement of the board, I entered into a successful dialogue with the Sisters of St. Ferdinand Convent, just 15 minutes drive from the seminary. They agreed to house female students during that J term. By the next year, we were able to arrange rooms for women on our campus. Another memory of this ecumenical program involves women. My mother was rather enthusiastic about my involvement with Team A. Her maternal uncles had been raised in Protestant churches. Her father's brother, whom she called Uncle Z, was Reverend Zach Ford Bond, a retired Baptist pastor who had been ordained in the prominent church on Broadway at 22nd Street in Louisville, and who had pastored the prestigious Hyde Park Baptist Church in Cincinnati. From his retirement home in Georgia, he offered me lots of encouragement on long-distance phone calls, in which my mother took great delight. In the meantime, my aunt, on my daddy's side, Sister Marie Celine, was saying, "I'm worried about Benny spending so much time with the Protestants and their married preachers. He might change his mind." Her audience, of course, was her big brother, Fonzie. I don't remember my aunt's opinion of my next escapade as a graduate student, but it would not be difficult to imagine. In another academic development in which student input was welcome, St. Meinrad School of Theology established a relationship with the Division of Graduate Studies at Indiana University in Bloomington. It had actually begun while I was still an undergraduate student, so I can't claim any credit for how it came about. Still, I supported it with enthusiasm. The State University, which in its inception had been a seminary, wanted to develop a graduate program offering a Master of Arts in Religious Studies. As I understand it, the program was off to a fairly faltering start, as it seems people were not stampeding towards a program in religious studies on a secular campus. However, with the realization that there was a Catholic monastery and seminary less than 2 hours south, with a rather fortified curriculum leading to a Master of Divinity degree, it must have occurred to someone that there was a potential enrollment harvest to be had. Surely, too, a light went on in some administrators' minds that these men might have some enthusiasm for residency on a co-ed university campus. Any of our seminary class having completed the third of 8 semesters while maintaining an upper end grade point average and achieving an appropriate score on the graduate record exam could transfer 12 graduate credits, take a 1-month reading course, a J term, then complete 12 more credits during the spring term while residing in the graduate students' residence hall at IU. Most of us took the opportunity to combine our undergraduate major with religious studies. So Tom, who had studied anthropology, pursued religious traditions of Native Americans. Keith studied religion and behavioral psychology. An English major, I worked on religion and literature. It was an opportunity, though, to approach the discernment about ordination with more than the strictly Roman Catholic ethos, both in terms of academic preparation and in terms of lifestyle choice. The 4 of us students preparing for service in the Archdiocese of Louisville had been in the strict seminary environment since our early teen years. Arriving at Bloomington in late January of 1971, we were assigned to an X-shaped tower of a building called Eigenman Hall. It was strictly for unaccompanied graduate students. Across the street in the shape of a half moon was Tulip Tree Quadrangle. Furnished with exterior playground equipment, these were apartments for married students with children. Among the many clues that we were not in Kansas anymore, i.e. the seminary, were the nicknames which we quickly learned for those buildings. Tulip Tree was called the Fertile Crescent, and we were living in Menopause Manor. It would be an eventful year, really pivotal for each of the 4 of us Kentuckians who had come to Bloomington in the winter of 1971. And while I don't remember us talking much about it, we all seemed to branch out in our own directions, developing individual interests and meeting other people. All meals were available in the dorm, and I'm sure we met up there occasionally, but more often than not, I was in another circle of new friends. Recently, I looked at an old photograph of about a dozen of my group at IU and could name most of them, even one who was not in the picture. Warren Umansky, a self-proclaimed Casanova, was likely holding the camera. He was probably the first Jew I ever met. A really good guy who was a physical education and recreation major. He once enlisted the gang's help in putting on a track and field meet for teens who were severely disabled. I was surprised that he wanted me to bring him a guitar, but he put me in a circle of kids who were sight and hearing impaired and who took delight in feeling the vibration of the wood while I strummed and cried. The other memorable story about Warren was that he was frustrated in his repeated requests of Carol Slamkowski, a very attractive psychology major, for a date. She said, "Sure, Ben," the first time I asked her out. In one of those life lessons, my older sister Clara explained to me about the forbidden fruit syndrome. Clara was an unofficial advisor to more than one of us seminary students. She explained that I need not worry about women responding favorably to offers of courtship from me. Before I got too far along with thinking I had some charm or good looks, she said, "No, honey, it's your being in the seminary that gives any woman a challenge she can't pass up." Of course, that dynamic from the early 1970s is chauvinistic in light of more developed gender dynamics today. Still, it is worth noting how it played out in another setting which received rather widespread attention. In 1977, Australian novelist Colleen McCullough published a best-selling novel entitled The Thornbirds. In 1983, a film version was presented as a television miniseries starring Richard Chamberlain, Rachel Ward, Barbara Stanwyck, and Piper Laurie, all of whom won performance awards. It captured the attention of a wide audience and remains to this day second only to Roots as the most watched miniseries in U.S. television history. It tops all in the global audience. Including the acting awards mentioned above, it garnered a People's Choice, 8 Golden Globes, and 11 Primetime Emmys. Set in the Australian outback in the first half of the 20th century, it is the saga of an ambitious priest and his discovery of passion with a naturally attractive young woman under the watchful eyes of her wealthy elderly aunt. Young Maggie is drawn to the sensitive and attractive priest, Father Ralph, and is naturally hurt when he chooses opportunities for advancement in Rome, skillfully arranged by Aunt Mary. In one very telling episode, Archbishop Ralph returns from Rome to tell the more mature Maggie that he wants to leave the priesthood and join her for a life on the sheep station. She rejects him. Perhaps it's the hurt that she cannot get past. That would be understandable, certainly justified. However, in the end, there is an emotional reconciliation. I think this rejection has more to do with the absence of the forbidden fruit syndrome. There are many more wonderful stories about Clara and her role as an older sister who affirmed me in all of my endeavors. This one, though, remains one of my favorites. She and I were having a meal at the Blue Boar restaurant, a popular Louisville eatery, and discussing family dynamics and particularly how we made decisions, how we dealt with our overbearing church as well as our father, one of which was changing while the other was yet to change. I was talking about the advice that I had received from various sources, such as teachers, priests, etc. Just as the waiter approached, well within earshot, I was looking intently at Clara and said, "Well, the best I ever got, I got from you." Clara's eyes darted back and forth between the waiter and me. She quickly said, "Advice. He means advice." Another element of life in Bloomington was weekend activity. For me, that included another part-time position as a parish song leader. It was the small parish of St. Jude in Spencer, Indiana. It was only one Mass each Sunday, and it was held in the priest's residence. I also worked Saturday nights in a liquor store on the main boulevard coming into Bloomington. Doug Bloom, a neighborhood friend from back in Louisville, was running his uncle's place and knew he could depend on the seminary student perhaps a little more than some of the local workforce. It provided me some income and this story. One of our most popular products was a sweet concoction made from neither grapes nor berries. Boone's Farm apple wine was hugely popular in this college town. Sales tax was 2%, So we priced it at 98 cents a bottle. Slap down a buck, get a quick high. One evening, a pseudo-sophisticated woman holding a bottle horizontally with both hands and both pinkies extended said to me, quote, "Certainly one serves a room temperature red with beef, veal, or pasta, and a modestly chilled white with poultry or seafood. But what, pray tell, does one serve with apple wine?" I replied, quote, "Madam, it is my guess that most of what is sold in this establishment is served with marijuana." Unquote. At the end of the semester in Bloomington, I accepted an invitation from two of my non-seminary friends to drive to California for a few days. Art needed a ride home to Sacramento, and Tom from Ohio had a car and relatives who would give us accommodations in the Bay Area. I could provide help with driving on the return trip, as well as enjoy some sightseeing in a place I had never been before. An unexpected treat was Cindy, one of Tom's cousins, who had never met a seminary student before, and who would ask me to wait up after the rest of the house had gone to sleep. And I think that might be the place to stop for this afternoon and wrap up this memoir tomorrow afternoon. Karen was kind enough to ask me before we started to give some of the pointers about our liturgical space. And let me just ask you, Karen, did I address most of the pressing questions that you've been getting? Okie doke. It is now 3 minutes till 5, and in about 33 minutes, we will celebrate the first Mass of our time of post-suspension, lifted effectively today, the 20th of May, and we will celebrate it in grand style with, I just think it's so appropriate that we're celebrating the Vigil of the Ascension tonight and Ascension Thursday tomorrow. Again, without what we have labeled all my life, the label Holy Day of Obligation. It is indeed a holy day when we celebrate the Lord's ascension, and we pray that we, our community, our nation, our world will ascend out of the mire of COVID-19. God bless everybody, and thank you.